The eviction notice on Sophie Williams' door wasn't even a surprise anymore. Third one this month, final warning. The paper trembled in her hands not from shock, but from the bone-deep exhaustion that had become her constant companion these past 18 months. Her tiny apartment, once a temporary landing spot after the divorce, now represented another failure in a growing collection. 35 years old, and here she was, surrounded by cardboard boxes she couldn't afford to fill, staring at bills she couldn't afford to pay. The irony wasn't lost on her. 5 years ago, she'd been living in a brownstone in Boston, with David planning vacation homes and retirement accounts. Now she was calculating if her ancient Honda would make a passable bedroom until something better came along. The advertising firm's restructuring had been the final blow. Her entire department eliminated with clinical efficiency, 17 years of experience reduced to a severance check that hadn't even covered 3 months' rent. Emma appeared in the doorway of her bedroom, clutching an old history book to her chest like a shield. At 12, she was already too perceptive, too aware of the precarious edge they balanced on. "We could sleep in the car like campers. I've always wanted to go camping." Sophie forced a smile, crossing the room to brush a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Always my little adventurer." The weight of her failure pressed down harder. Emma deserved stability, not adventures born from desperation. The laptop balanced precariously on the worn couch cushion, open to yet another page of rental listings she couldn't afford. Each one a reminder of how quickly security could evaporate. The divorce had taken her savings. The job loss had taken her income. The eviction would take what little stability remained. Her cursor hovered over an unaffordable listing when an oddity caught her eye. A small rectangular image of a house different from the sleek apartment photos dominating the page. The listing title alone made her pause. "Historic property, $500, sold as is. Cash only." A scam, obviously. Yet her cursor clicked anyway. The page loaded to reveal a 2-story Victorian farmhouse. Its white paint peeling like sunburned skin, wraparound porch sagging at one corner. Windows stared out like clouded eyes, some cracked, all neglected. The yard had surrendered to nature years ago, knee-high grass interrupted by the skeletal remains of what might have been a garden. $500, the price of a mediocre television. Less than 1 month's rent for her current apartment. More photos confirmed the interior matched the exterior's state of decay. Faded wallpaper curling at the seams. Hardwood floors dulled by decades of footsteps and neglect. A kitchen with appliances that belonged in a museum. Yet beneath the deterioration, Sophie could see the bones of something that had once been beautiful. High ceilings and intricate woodwork. Bay windows that would flood rooms with natural light if properly cleaned. The listing details were sparse. Built 1851, 4 bedrooms, full basement. Located in Millbrook, a small town she vaguely recognized as being about 3 hours west of Boston. Property sold as is, no inspections, cash only. Contact Mark Simmons, Millbrook Realty. Her finger hesitated over the phone icon. This was madness. Houses didn't sell for $500 unless they were condemned or about to be swallowed by sinkholes. There had to be a catch: property taxes, liens, structural damage that would cost tens of thousands to repair. And yet, what other options remained? Another overpriced apartment rental she'd be evicted from when the money inevitably ran out. Sleeping in her car until winter came. Moving back to her parents' retirement community in Florida, admitting complete defeat before reason could reassert itself. Sophie pressed the call button. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered, sounding surprised to receive a call at all. Yes, the house was still available. Yes, the price was correct. No, there were no hidden fees, just property taxes of $1.02 annually. The previous owner had died without heirs, and the town simply wanted someone to take responsibility for the property. Could she come see it tomorrow? He'd meet her there at noon. After hanging up, Sophie sat motionless, mind racing through calculations. Her bank account held $2,340, the remainder of her severance after months of careful rationing. Enough for the house and taxes, with just enough left to survive until she found work. Somewhere. Somehow. She called Trang next, needing to hear a voice of reason before she drove 3 hours to potentially make the worst decision of her life. The cafe was nearly empty when they met the following morning. Trang's expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief to outright alarm as she scrolled through the photos on Sophie's laptop. Nobody sells a house for 500 unless there's a body buried in the basement. The words hung between them. Trang's face creased with concern rather than judgment. She'd been there through the divorce, through the job loss, through the slow unraveling of Sophie's carefully constructed life. They both knew desperation when they saw it. Sophie's fingers wrapped around her coffee mug, seeking warmth that didn't reach the coldness inside. What choice do I have? The question needed no answer. They both knew the alternatives. Trang's silence acknowledged the impossible math of Sophie's situation. It could be structurally sound, Sophie said, studying the photographs more carefully. The slate roof tiles need replacement, maybe 30% of them. The windows are original guillotine-style Victorian frames, intact, but glass broken. Electrical system looks like knob and tube from the 1950s, would need complete updating. Since when are you a structural engineer? I design and ad campaigns for 3 home renovation companies. Learn more than I ever wanted about building techniques. The coffee grew cold as they talked through scenarios none ideal. Best case, the house needed cosmetic repairs Sophie could manage while finding work in or near Millbrook. Worst case, the place was uninhabitable and she'd lose 500 she couldn't afford to lose. Trang's parting words followed Sophie home. You're desperate, and desperate people make terrible decisions. The truth of it settled like a stone in her stomach as she packed an overnight bag, loaded her laptop and a few essentials into her car, and programmed Millbrook into her GPS. Emma bounced with unexpected excitement in the passenger seat, clutching her history book, and a pillow, treating the journey like an adventure rather than a last resort. Did you know Millbrook was founded in 1793? Emma read from her phone as Sophie navigated through early morning traffic. It used to be a paper mill town, but now there are only 273 people living there. The drive stretched before them, miles of highway blurring, as Sophie's mind raced through contingency plans, each more unlikely than the last. Turn the house into an Airbnb, flip it for profit, discover hidden treasure in the attic. I can help fix it up. Emma continued, her enthusiasm rising with each mile that took them farther from Boston. I've been watching YouTube videos about old house restoration. Sophie glanced over, surprised to see genuine excitement in her daughter's eyes. This was the most animated Emma had been since the divorce. Whatever happened with this house, that alone almost made the gamble worthwhile. By the time the GPS announced their arrival in Millbrook, fantasy had given way to the more probable reality: she was making a catastrophic mistake. Millbrook greeted them with the quiet dignity of a town that had seen better days. Main Street featured the expected assortment of small businesses, hardware store, diner, pharmacy, library, most housed in brick buildings dating back a century or more. A few displayed closed signs in windows, casualties of changing times and economic hardship. Sophie's stomach reminded her that coffee had been her only sustenance since morning. They parked outside Millie's Diner, its neon open sign buzzing in the early afternoon sun. Inside, the scent of coffee and grilled onions wrapped around them like a familiar blanket. A handful of patrons occupied booths and counter seats, conversations hushing briefly as the door announced their arrival. The booth nearest the window held 3 men in business attire, an unexpected sight in a town this size. Their conversation carried across the half-empty diner, dominated by a deep voice emanating from a man in his 50s, silver hair framing a face accustomed to being listened to. Sophie recognized the vocabulary of real estate development, acquisitions, zoning changes, property values. Her attention sharpened when she heard resort complex and waterfront access. She'd worked on similar campaigns at the firm, marketing materials that transformed struggling communities into vacation destinations. Their sandwiches arrived as the men stood to leave. The silver-haired man dropped bills on the table, gesturing emphatically as he continued outlining his vision. His path to the door brought him directly past their booth. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, caught the real estate listing displayed on Sophie's phone. He paused, gaze lingering long enough for Sophie to feel a prickle of discomfort along her spine. That dump! You'd be better off sleeping in your car, honey. The words carried no concern, only dismissal, as if her interest in the property somehow offended him personally. Before she could respond, he was gone, the bell above the door punctuating his exit. The waitress appeared with a coffee pot, offering a refill and an explanation without being asked. Robert Blackwood owns half the commercial property in town already, trying to buy up residential next, wants to turn Millbrook into some kind of tourist trap. Sophie nodded her thanks both for the coffee and the information. The encounter left her unsettled, though she couldn't articulate why. Something in Blackwood's expression when he'd seen the listing, not surprise or confusion, but something closer to irritation, as if her interest interfered with plans already in motion. The GPS guided them through town and onto increasingly narrow roads, houses growing farther apart until they disappeared altogether. Just as Sophie began to wonder if they'd missed a turn, the Victorian farmhouse from the listing appeared around a bend. The photographs hadn't captured the isolation. The house stood alone at the end of a gravel drive, surrounded by overgrown fields that gave way to dense woods behind the property. No neighbors in sight, no passing traffic, just the house waiting in silence, watching their approach with its clouded windows. They parked in what had once been a circular drive, now reduced to twin ruts through encroaching grass. Up close, the decay was even more apparent, gutters hanging at precarious angles, shingles missing from the steep roof paint, not just peeling but absent entirely in patches, revealing weathered gray wood beneath. Yet there was something undeniably captivating about the place. The wraparound porch, while sagging, spoke of summer evenings, watching sunsets. The ornate trim along the roofline, though neglected, hinted at craftsmanship long forgotten. The proportions and lines retained dignity despite decades of neglect. A car approached behind them, tires crunching on gravel. An ancient Buick pulled alongside their Honda, its faded blue paint almost silver in places. The man who emerged moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints protested sudden movements. Mid-70s, at least, thinning white hair that had receded to form a horseshoe around his spotted scalp. Mark Simmons's handshake was surprisingly firm, despite hands that trembled slightly. His eyes, a watery blue behind thick glasses, darted around as if expecting to find someone else present. He fumbled with an ancient key ring, separating a large iron key from its companions. The front door protested with a groan that suggested it hadn't been opened in months, possibly years. The scent of abandonment rushed out to greet them, dust and mildew, and the particular emptiness of spaces long uninhabited. Simmons remained on the porch as Sophie and Emma stepped across the threshold. Something in his posture suggested reluctance, as if the house itself made him uncomfortable. His commentary came in fragmented burst, details about the property's history interspersed with long silences. Built by the Preston family in 1851, passed down through generations. Last heir died 20 years ago. No children to inherit. Town took ownership for unpaid taxes. Been sitting empty since. Sophie moved through rooms, slowly, footsteps echoing on hardwood floors. The layout was traditional formal parlor and dining room flanking a central hallway, kitchen, and study beyond. A staircase with an intricately carved banister led to the second floor's 4 bedrooms. Despite the dust and cobwebs, the interior had suffered less than the exterior. No obvious water damage, no sagging ceilings or buckled floors. The kitchen's appliances were indeed antiques dating from perhaps the 1950s. The bathroom fixtures were similarly dated but intact. Throughout the house, hints of former elegance peeked through the neglect-crowned molding, built-in bookcases, window seats beneath bay windows. Emma moved from room to room with growing excitement, whispering to Sophie, "I told you it would be perfect." When Sophie inquired about the house's unusually low price, Simmons's response was cryptic at best. "The house has been empty for 20 years. Some say it chose to be that way." He hurried through the paperwork with an efficiency that bordered on desperation. No mortgage paperwork since Sophie was paying cash. No inspection contingencies. No disclosures beyond the absolute legal minimum. Just a simple bill of sale and transfer of deed notarized on the spot with a stamp he produced from his pocket. As she handed over the cashier's check, $500 a sum, so insignificant for a house that it seemed absurd, Simmons finally met her eyes directly. His expression contained something that might have been pity or perhaps concern. "Most folks in town avoid this place. They say it has stories to tell." He handed her a set of keys, the iron front door key and several smaller ones, without explanation. Not all houses want to tell their stories. With those parting words, Simmons departed, leaving Sophie and Emma alone with their purchase. The sound of his car faded down the gravel drive, replaced by a silence so complete it seemed to have physical weight. Sophie stood on the porch, keys cold in her palm, reality sinking in. She owned a house. For $500, she had acquired 4 walls, a roof, and a chance to rebuild her life from the foundation up. The thought should have brought relief, even excitement. Instead, she felt a curious sense of being watched, as if the house itself were assessing its new owner. We're going to need supplies, she told Emma, pushing away the irrational feeling. Let's see what we can find in town. Millbrook Hardware occupied a corner building with windows showcasing everything from gardening tools to plumbing supplies. The bell above the door announced their entry, drawing the attention of a silver-haired woman arranging paintbrushes behind the counter. Her name tag identified her as Eleanor Wilson, owner. Sophie gathered her supplies: bucket, mop cleaning solutions, flashlights, batteries, a camping lantern, while feeling Eleanor's gaze following her movements. When she approached the counter to pay, the older woman's expression had settled into something between curiosity and concern. "You're the one who bought the Preston place." Not a question, but a statement delivered in a tone that suggested the purchase was common knowledge already. In a town this size, Sophie supposed news traveled faster than light. Eleanor's hands moved efficiently, scanning items, while her eyes remained fixed on Sophie's face. "You fixing to stay there tonight?" "Alone." Sophie nodded, uncomfortable under the scrutiny, but unwilling to show it. The older woman fell silent, lips pressed into a thin line as she continued ringing up purchases. As she handed over the receipt, she leaned forward, slightly, a voice lowered, though no other customers were present. "That house has stood empty a long time. Not without reason." Before Sophie could respond, the door opened, bell jangling, as an elderly man entered. His arrival seemed to break whatever Eleanor had been about to add. She straightened, smile returning, though it didn't reach her eyes. Sophie gathered her bags and turned to leave, nearly colliding with the newcomer. His weathered face creased into a smile, deep lines, suggesting it was a frequent expression. "William Barnes," according to the patch on his worn denim jacket. "That house has stories to tell," he said, then paused, studying her face. "Not all houses want to tell their stories." The words stopped Sophie at the threshold, an echo of Simmons's parting comment. When she turned back, Barnes's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes held the same concern she'd seen in Eleanor's. The drive back to the Preston house felt longer than it had earlier, each turn taking them farther from the comforting presence of other humans. By the time they pulled into the overgrown drive, twilight had begun to soften the edges of the landscape. The house loomed larger somehow in the fading light, its windows reflecting the dying sun like dulled copper. Sophie unloaded their supplies and re-entered her new home, keenly aware of the silence that greeted them. The air inside felt heavier than it had during the day, as if the darkness gathering in corners added physical weight to the atmosphere. She set up the camping lantern in the kitchen, its glow creating a small island of light in the growing shadows. Her phone showed no service, another detail she'd need to address. For tonight, at least, they were completely cut off from the outside world. The thought should have been more troubling than it was. Instead, after months of urgent emails and creditor calls, the silence felt almost like relief. She made a simple dinner from supplies purchased at the small grocery store, bread, cheese, and apples, and ate at the kitchen table, listening to the house settling around her. Every old building had its noises, boards expanding and contracting with temperature changes, wind finding entry through imperceptible gaps. Nothing unusual in the occasional creak or groan of century-old timbers. Yet as darkness claimed the house completely, Sophie found herself straining to identify each sound, cataloging them as either explicable or concerning. The branch scraping against an upstairs window, normal. The distant hoot of an owl, expected in a rural setting. The faint but distinct knock that seemed to come from beneath the floor, decidedly less explainable. She froze, sandwich halfway to her mouth, listening intently. Nothing. Then, just as she began to relax, it came again. 3 distinct knocks, not random or mechanical, but deliberate, as if someone were trying to get her attention. "Emma," she called, wondering if her daughter was playing some kind of game. Emma appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "Did you hear that too? I thought I was imagining things." Sophie set down her food and picked up the flashlight, moving cautiously toward the sound's origin in the formal parlor. The knocking had stopped again, leaving only the sound of their own breathing and footsteps on hardwood. The parlor's high ceiling disappeared into shadows above the lantern's reach. Heavy drapes thick with dust hung at tall windows. A fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel adorned with delicate but grimy carvings. The room contained no furniture. Simmons had mentioned that anything of value had been auctioned off years ago. Sophie moved the lantern, slowly illuminating each corner, finding nothing that could explain the knocking. The floor beneath her feet was solid oak, no sign of weakness or damage. She knelt, pressing her palm against the wood, feeling nothing but cool, smooth planks. As she rose, the beam of her flashlight caught something behind the peeling wallpaper near the fireplace. A corner had pulled away from the wall, revealing another layer beneath. Sophie approached cautiously, using a fingernail to gently pull the paper back further. Mom, look it. Emma had moved beside her, excitement replacing fear. It's a drawing. A child's drawing emerged, the colors faded but still discernible, crude figures holding hands, standing before what appeared to be a house. Above them, written in uneven block letters, safe. Sophie's touch seemed to trigger something in the house. The knocking ceased abruptly, as if a circuit had been broken. The silence that followed felt different, not the absence of sound, but a presence of its own, watching, waiting. Whatever secrets you're hiding, Sophie whispered to the empty room, to the house itself, I've got nowhere else to go. The words came unbidden, spoken aloud as an acknowledgement of the strange compact she'd entered into with this place. She wasn't sure why she said them, only that they felt necessary. They slept fitfully that night, wrapped in sleeping bags they'd brought from the apartment, using duffels as pillows, on the cleanest patch of floor they could find in the main bedroom. Dreams came in fragments, footsteps on stairs, whispered conversations just beyond comprehension, the sensation of being watched by kind but urgent eyes. Morning brought clarity and determination. Whatever mysteries the house might hold could wait. First priorities were practical, arranging for utilities, beginning the massive cleaning job, and assessing what repairs were truly essential versus those that could wait. The town offices occupied a dignified brick building on Main Street. Inside, Sophie found the process of transferring utilities surprisingly straightforward. The clerk processing her paperwork, a middle-aged woman with an efficient manner, made no comment about the Preston house, though her eyes widened slightly at the address. The local library became Sophie's next stop, both to use their internet connection and to research the house's history. Millbrook Library occupied a Victorian building almost as old as the Preston house. Its interior, a soothing landscape of wooden shelves and reading nooks. Eleanor Wilson looked up from the circulation desk, surprise flashing across her features before settling into a neutral expression. Sophie hadn't connected the hardware store owner with the library until that moment, but in a town this size, wearing multiple hats was probably common. The older woman's eyes followed Sophie to the public computer's, interest evident in her gaze. Emma wandered off to the children's section, immediately absorbed in exploring the shelves. After an hour of research yielded little beyond basic historical records, the house's construction date, the Preston family's prominence in early Millbrook. Nothing that explained the town's strange reactions. Sophie approached the desk directly. Eleanor's initial reluctance was palpable, her answers to questions about the house's history vague and uninformative. Local records were incomplete. The Preston family had been private people. Most information had been lost to time. Only when Sophie mentioned the strange knocking did something shift in Eleanor's demeanor. The older woman's posture, stiffened eyes darting to ensure no one else was within earshot. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The Preston family helped people seeking freedom. That's all I'll say. The statement hung between them, significant but incomplete. Before Sophie could press further, Eleanor reached beneath the counter and withdrew a yellowed piece of paper, folded and refolded so many times the creases had begun to tear. If you hear them, they're ready to be found. With those cryptic words, Eleanor turned to assist another patron, conversation clearly finished. Sophie unfolded the paper carefully, revealing what appeared to be a page torn from a journal. The handwriting was elegant, but faded, the ink brown with age. The date at the top, April 17th, 1856, immediately caught her attention. 3 more arrived tonight, brought by Samuel from the crossing. The woman and child are ill from exposure, requiring Martha's tinctures. They shall rest in the chamber until strength returns, then continue north when the moon wanes. Thomas has marked the route to the Wilson farm, though we must avoid the usual path as Blackwood's men have been patrolling with increasing frequency. Providence has blessed us with this haven, and we shall continue to extend its protection to all who seek the light of freedom. The entry was signed simply E. Preston, the flourish beneath the name confident and bold, despite the obvious need for secrecy in the contents. Sophie read it several times, certain pieces clicking into place. The Underground Railroad. The Preston family had been conductors, their home a station for escaped slaves traveling north to freedom. She returned to her research with renewed focus, finding scattered references that supported this theory. The Preston family's Quaker background, Their known abolitionist sympathies, the house's location relatively isolated, yet positioned along routes that could conceivably have been used by those escaping north. None of this explained the knocking or the town's reluctance to discuss the property, but it provided context Sophie hadn't had before. The house hadn't just been a home. It had been a sanctuary, a waypoint in the journey from bondage to freedom. As she prepared to leave the library, Eleanor approached her, expression softened somewhat. She placed a business card on the table, not for the hardware store or library, but listing her personal contact information. History isn't always found in books. Sometimes it's in the walls and the floors, in the very bones of a place. If you find more, call me, day or night. Sophie's return to the house that afternoon came with a new perspective. She no longer saw just the peeling paint and sagging porch, but imagined those who might have arrived under cover of darkness as exhausted and frightened, finding safety within these walls. The thought lent purpose to her cleaning efforts, as if she were uncovering not just a living space for herself, but honoring those who had passed through before her. She worked until sunset, making surprising progress. The kitchen and one bedroom were now habitable, if not comfortable. The electricity had been connected with unexpected speed, allowing her to run the ancient refrigerator, which hummed to life as if merely napping for the past 20 years, rather than sitting dormant. Emma took to the work with enthusiasm, seemingly energized rather than discouraged by the house's condition. She'd spent the afternoon clearing debris from the porch, sorting items into piles of definitely trash, and maybe useful, her imagination transforming the tedious task into an archaeological expedition. As darkness fell, Sophie found herself listening for the knocking again. It didn't come. Instead, the house settled around them with creaks and shitties that seemed almost conversational, as if responding to their presence and efforts. She slept better that night, exhaustion overcoming the strangeness of her surroundings. The dreams returned, footsteps, whispers, watching eyes, but they felt less intrusive, more welcoming, as if the house were gradually accepting their presence. Morning brought a new development. Sophie opened the front door to find Robert Blackwood on her porch, hand raised to knock. His surprise at her appearance suggested he hadn't expected to find the house occupied. His recovery was swift, smile appearing with practiced ease. "A welcome to the neighborhood," he claimed. A friendly visit to see if she needed assistance with the obviously overwhelming project she'd undertaken. Sophie listened with growing skepticism as Blackwood extolled the challenges of restoring a house this age. The qualified tradespeople needed the specialized skills required, the unlikelihood of a single woman managing such a task alone, all delivered with a veneer of concern that didn't reach his calculating eyes. Then came the offer, $10,000 for the property, a generous amount, he emphasized, given what she'd paid. A chance to walk away from what would surely become a money pit, part of his community improvement project. He explained the development would bring jobs, tourist prosperity, to a town slowly dying from economic neglect. The offer hung between them, tempting in its practicality. $10,000 would give Sophie breathing room, time to find proper employment, a new start somewhere with actual opportunities. The logical part of her brain screamed to accept, to thank whatever lucky stars had turned $500 into a 20-fold return overnight. But something deeper refused. Perhaps it was the journal page in her pocket, the knowledge of what this house had meant to people seeking freedom. Perhaps it was Blackwood's barely concealed assumption that she would fail. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, the memory of knocking from below, the child's drawing, with its simple promise, safe. Sophie declined with a politeness that barely masked her resolve. Blackwood's smile remained fixed, though something flickered in his eyes, irritation perhaps, or the recalibration of strategy. His parting words carried an edge beneath their friendly surface. "You'll find Millbrook can be unwelcoming to outsiders who don't understand our ways. If you change your mind, and you will, my offer stands. For now." The implied threat lingered after his departure, the crunch of expensive tires on gravel, underlining his confidence that this wasn't their final conversation on the matter. Sophie's encounter with Blackwood prompted another visit to Eleanor. The hardware store was quiet when she arrived, allowing for conversation without concern for eavesdroppers. Eleanor's lack of surprise at Blackwood's offer confirmed Sophie's suspicion that this wasn't his first attempt to acquire the property. Blackwood's family has wanted that land for generations. Never knew why. The older woman's expression grew distant, as if accessing memories long filed away. The Blackwoods and Prestons have history, Bad blood going back to before the war. Robert's grandfather tried to buy the place in the 30s. His father in the 60s. Now him. This persistence across generations suggested something beyond simple real estate interest. Sophie described the journal page, watching Eleanor's reaction carefully. The older woman showed no surprise, only resignation, as if a long-anticipated moment had finally arrived. The conversation left Sophie with more questions than answers, but one certainty emerged. The Preston house was significant beyond its physical value. To Blackwood, to Eleanor, to the town itself. She had stumbled into a story generations in the making, one she was only beginning to understand. Back at the house, Sophie applied herself to cleaning with renewed determination. Each room revealed small details she'd missed during her initial inspection: a carved initial in a door frame, a loose floorboard that concealed a small space perfect for hiding valuables, a pattern in the parlor wallpaper that seemed to contain symbols rather than simple decoration when viewed from certain angles. She found herself talking to the house as she worked a one-sided conversation that nonetheless felt reciprocated in subtle ways, a board creaking in what seemed like response. A sudden shaft of sunlight illuminating an area she'd been struggling to clean, the sensation of approval when she carefully preserved rather than discarded original features. By late afternoon, she turned her attention to the formal living room. The heavy oak cabinet against the wall had clearly been too cumbersome to remove during whatever clearing out had happened after the last Preston died. It dominated the space, ornately carved and solid as a mountain. Sophie's methodical measurements of the house had revealed a discrepancy she couldn't explain. The interior dimensions didn't match the exterior footprint. Somewhere space was unaccounted for, and her suspicion focused on the living room wall behind the massive cabinet. Moving it proved nearly impossible. The piece was not just heavy, but seemed almost anchored in place, as if reluctant to give up its position as guardian. Sophie pushed and pulled, muscles straining against the unyielding wood, achieving nothing but frustration and splinters. Only when Emma joined her did they make progress. Her daughter had spent the day exploring the kind of unstructured play Sophie hadn't seen her engage in since before the divorce. Now she approached the cabinet with the same enthusiasm. "Mom, look at the floor underneath," Emma pointed out. "The wood's darker here, like something's been dragged back and forth." Sophie hadn't noticed that detail, a subtle variation in the oak's patina that indeed suggested repeated movement. They repositioned themselves, pushing at different angles until they found one that met with less resistance. "It wants to move this way," Emma insisted, and Sophie found herself nodding at the strange but apt personification. The cabinet did seem to have preferences, as if it might cooperate if approached correctly. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through windows they'd managed to clean, Sophie made a final determined push. Emma joined her, their combined strength finally overcoming whatever resistance had held the piece in place. With a groaning protest of wood against wood, the cabinet finally moved, revealing the wall behind it. At first glance, nothing appeared unusual. The same faded wallpaper covered the surface, its pattern of vines and subtle symbols consistent with the rest of the room. But as Sophie examined it more closely, inconsistencies emerged. The pattern didn't quite align with surrounding sections. The color was slightly different, as if this portion had been protected from light while the rest faded. "Mom, look, the pattern doesn't match up here. It's like someone tried to hide a door." Sophie ran her fingers along the seam where the pattern misaligned, feeling a subtle depression beneath the paper. Heart quickening, she pressed more firmly, following what seemed to be the outline of a door frame hidden beneath layers of wallpaper. The discovery sent a thrill of vindication through her. She wasn't imagining things. The house did have secrets, physical ones that could be uncovered, documented, understood. Night had fallen by the time Sophie finished tracing the hidden doorframe with her fingertips. The outline formed a rectangle taller than it was wide, not quite reaching the ceiling, positioned in the wall where her measurements had indicated missing space should be. She resisted the immediate urge to tear away the wallpaper to expose whatever lay behind it. This discovery deserved care and documentation. Besides, exhaustion had begun to cloud her judgment, muscles aching from the day's physical labor. The knocking returned that night, more insistent than before. 3 distinct raps from somewhere beneath the floor, followed by silence, then 3 more. A pattern of communication, not random settling or animal activity. Sophie lay awake, listening, her mind racing with possibilities. Underground railroad stations often had hidden rooms, secret passages, concealed spaces where fugitives could hide if slave catchers came searching. Was that what waited behind the wallpaper? A forgotten hiding place, its purpose, and occupants lost to time. The first light of dawn found her already awake, determination having overcome exhaustion. Emma joined her, equally eager to solve the mystery. Together, they carefully began peeling away the wallpaper, photographing each stage with Sophie's phone. The paper came away in strips, revealing another layer beneath, not plaster or lath as expected, but wood. Smooth, dark oak, its grains still visible despite years hidden behind wallpaper. As more paper fell away, details emerged. The door was indeed smaller than a standard doorway, requiring one to stoop slightly to pass through. Its edges fitted so precisely into the surrounding wall that it would be nearly invisible when closed if not for the subtle difference in wood grain. No handle or knob interrupted its surface. Instead, a small circular indentation marked the spot where some mechanism would allow it to open. Sophie pressed her finger against it experimentally, feeling a slight give but no release. Emma studied the door with growing excitement, her history book open beside her. This is exactly like the hidden doors they used in underground railroad houses. They needed ways to hide people quickly if slave catchers came. Sophie nodded, impressed by her daughter's knowledge and the validation it brought to their discovery. The house seemed to hold its breath as they worked, the usual creaks and settling noises absent. Only when her phone chimed with an incoming text signal, apparently restored overnight, did Sophie realize how long they'd been working, how completely absorbed in the task. The message was from Trang, checking that she was all right. Sophie responded with a brief reassurance, not mentioning her discovery. Some instinct urged caution about sharing too much too soon, even with someone who'd aligned with her interests. She returned to the hidden door, studying it from different angles, trying to understand its mechanism. A key perhaps, but no keyhole was visible. A pressure point, but pressing against the circular indentation yielded nothing. Frustration mounted as the day progressed with no breakthrough. Sophie took breaks to continue cleaning other areas, to eat, to make notes about her discovery, always returning to the door with renewed determination that gradually gave way to resignation. As sunset approached, casting long shadows through windows they'd managed to clean, Sophie sat cross-legged before the door. Her fingers traced the grain of the wood absently, mind turning over possibilities. The knocking returned suddenly, 3 distinct raps from beneath the floor directly below where she sat. Sophie's startled hand automatically pressed against the circular indentation in surprise rather than intention. Something clicked. A mechanism silent for decades released with a sound like a sum. The door shifted inward a fraction of an inch, a draft of cool air escaping through the newly created gap. Sophie held her breath, fingers curling around the edge of the door, gently pulling. It resisted briefly, then surrendered, swinging inward, with a low groan of hinges unused for longer than she'd been alive. Beyond the threshold, illuminated by the dying sunlight at her back, a narrow staircase descended into darkness. Stone steps, worn smooth in the center from countless footsteps, led downward at a steep angle. The air that rose from below carried scents she couldn't immediately identify: earth and stone, old paper, something metallic. Sophie's flashlight beam probed the darkness, revealing walls of rough stone interspersed with timber supports. The staircase curved slightly to the left as it descended, preventing her from seeing its destination from the threshold. Emma appeared beside her, eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. "You found it, Mom. You found what the house wanted you to find." For a long moment they stood motionless, flashlight beam trembling slightly in Sophie's grip. The house seemed to wait with them, the silence expectant rather than empty. "Whatever you're hiding," Sophie whispered to the darkness beyond, "I'm coming to find you." The words came unbidden, a promise to the house and to herself, to those who had passed through before, and to whatever waited below. With a deep breath that tasted of history and secrets, Sophie took Emma's hand, and together they stepped across the threshold and began their descent into the heart of the Preston house. The cool draft from the stairwell wrapped around Sophie's ankles as she descended, her flashlight beam illuminating each worn stone step. The stairs curved gently leftward, preventing her from seeing the bottom until she was nearly there. Each step felt deliberately placed, slightly uneven, as if carved by hand rather than machine. The walls narrowed as they descended, rough stone interspersed with ancient timber supports that groaned softly as they passed, acknowledging their presence. Emma's breathing quickened with excitement, her hand gripping Sophie's tightly. The girl's natural courage surprised Sophie, where most children might have hesitated at the threshold of a dark, hidden passage. Emma had stepped forward without hesitation, as if answering a call only she could hear. Their breathing echoed in the confined space, surprisingly loud in the otherwise perfect silence. No house noises reached here, no settling timbers, no wind against windows. This place existed separate from the world above, sealed away by time and intention. The staircase ended abruptly at a heavy wooden door broader than the one they had discovered upstairs. Iron bands reinforced the weathered oak, the metal dark with age, but untouched by rust in the dry underground air. No handle interrupted its surface, only a keyhole of unusual design larger than modern locks, with intricate workings visible within. Sophie ran her fingers over the door's surface, feeling the grain of wood that had been touched by countless hands before hers. The iron bands were cold against her skin, their patterns suggesting decorative purpose beyond mere reinforcement. Someone had crafted this door with care, designed it to last centuries. The keyhole presented an immediate obstacle. None of the keys Simmons had given her matched its unusual size and shape. Sophie knelt, shining her flashlight directly into the mechanism, hoping to understand its workings. The beam revealed an intricate arrangement of tumblers and wards of a complexity that suggested security had been paramount to its creator. Emma traced her fingers along the stone wall beside the door. "Look, Mom, there's writing here." Her flashlight illuminated a small inscription carved into the stone frame. "Seek at the highest point to open the lowest door." For long minutes they remained crouched before the door, frustration mounting. To have come this far only to be stopped by a locked door seemed cruelly anticlimactic. Sophie pressed her palm flat against the wood, feeling the subtle vibration that suggested a large space beyond. The house had guided them this far, the knocking had led them to the hidden door upstairs. Surely there must be a way forward. They returned upstairs, the hidden door remaining open behind them. Night had fallen completely. The house dark except for the camping lantern they'd left in the kitchen. Sophie heated a simple dinner, mind churning with possibilities as they ate. The thought came suddenly, what if the key wasn't lost, but hidden? The Preston family had concealed an entire staircase behind the living room wall. Perhaps they had been equally careful with the key to whatever lay beyond the underground door. "Highest point," Emma repeated between bites of canned soup. "The attic, that has to be the highest point in the house." With renewed purpose, Sophie gathered flashlights and led the way to the narrow door at the end of the upstairs hallway. The hinges protested as she pulled it open, revealing a steep staircase ascending into darkness. Dust motes danced in the flashlight beam, undisturbed for decades until their intrusion. The storm that had been threatening all day finally arrived, raindrops beginning to pepper the roof above them. As they climbed the attic stairs, the gentle patter transformed into a downpour water, drumming against the slate tiles with increasing intensity. The timing felt significant somehow, as if nature itself was responding to their discovery. The attic stretched the full length of the house, its ceiling following the steep pitch of the roof. Exposed beams crisscrossed the space, cobwebs strung between them like delicate lace. Old trunks and discarded furniture created shadowy shapes in the corners. The rain intensified, transforming from steady drumming to violent assault, punctuated by the first rumble of distant thunder. "We should be methodical," Sophie advised, trying to organize their search in the vast, cluttered space. "Look for anything that might be a hiding place: loose floorboards, hollow spaces in the beams, hidden compartments in furniture." They worked in tandem, moving from one end of the attic toward the other, examining every potential hiding spot. The storm grew fiercer, outside wind now joining the rain, howling around the eaves and finding entry through small gaps in the roof. Occasional flashes of lightning illuminated the space more brightly than their flashlights, casting stark momentary shadows. A particularly violent thunderclap shook the house just as Emma called out, "Mom, I found something." She was kneeling in the far corner, examining the floorboards. "This one's a different color than the others. See how it's darker." Sophie joined her, directing her light at the spot Emma indicated. Indeed, one rectangular section of flooring appeared slightly darker than the surrounding wood, the difference so subtle she might have overlooked it during casual inspection. Kneeling, she ran her fingers over the section, feeling a nearly imperceptible seam around its edges. Her heart quickened as she pressed experimentally on one end. The opposite end rose slightly, a lever mechanism, perfectly balanced. Sophie lifted the small section of flooring, completely revealing a cavity beneath. Inside lay a metal box no larger than a paperback book, its surface darkened with age but free from rust. She lifted it carefully, surprised by its weight. The lid opened on silent hinges, revealing contents arranged with careful precision. A stack of photographs, sepia-toned and fragile, showed the Preston house in its prime. A family stood on the porch in formal attire. A bearded man, a woman in a high-necked dress, three children arranged by height. Their expressions were solemn as photographs from that era required, but something in their posture suggested quiet strength rather than stiffness. Beneath the photographs lay a journal, its leather binding cracked but intact. Sophie opened it reverently, careful not to damage the brittle pages. Entries dated from 1853 to 1864 detailed daily life interspersed with coded references to visitors, travelers, and friends seeking rest. The language was deliberately vague, but the meaning clear to anyone familiar with Underground Railroad terminology. A folded paper contained a hand-drawn map of the region, marked with symbols that appeared random but surely held meaning. Lines connected various points, suggesting routes or connections between locations. The Preston house was clearly marked, as was the river several miles to the north, and what appeared to be other safe houses along the way. At the bottom of the box, nestled in a small velvet pouch, Sophie found what they had been searching for: a key. Iron like the door it belonged to, ornately crafted with the same flowing pattern as the bands on the underground door. The Preston family crest adorned its bow, the same design she had seen on the journal's cover. Sophie held the key with trembling fingers, feeling its significant weight, the responsibility it represented. Generations had guarded this key, kept it hidden, along with evidence of their dangerous but moral work. Now it had revealed itself to her, entrusting its purpose to a new keeper. "The storm is getting worse," Emma observed as another thunderclap shook the house. "It's like the sky is responding to what we're doing." They descended from the attic, the house creaking and moaning around them as the wind found new entry points. By the time they reached the hidden staircase, rain was beginning to seep through cracks in the upstairs ceiling, forming small puddles on the hardwood floors. Sophie hesitated at the top of the stone stairs. The storm's increasing fury made the idea of descending underground suddenly unappealing. What if they became trapped below? What if the old house suffered damage while they were underground, blocking their exit? Emma sensed her mother's hesitation. "The house wouldn't have shown us the way if it wasn't safe. I think it's been waiting for someone to find this." The absolute conviction in her daughter's voice overcame Sophie's uncertainty. She nodded, clutching the iron key tightly, and they began their descent once more. The contrast between the storm's chaos above and the profound stillness of the stairwell was striking, as if they were passing through a threshold between worlds, between times. At the iron-bound door, Sophie knelt before the keyhole, aligning the ancient key with equally ancient lock. It entered smoothly, as if the mechanism had been oiled recently rather than sitting unused for decades. She held her breath as she turned the key, feeling resistance, then a series of distinct clicks as tumblers fell into place. The final turn produced a deep, resonant thunk that she felt more than heard, a sound that seemed to echo through the stone around them. She withdrew the key, tucking it into her pocket, then placed both hands against the door surface and pushed. Resistance greeted her efforts, not the resistance of a locked door, but the natural inertia of heavy wood that had remained stationary for years. Sophie leaned her weight into it, muscles straining. Emma joined her, adding her smaller force to the effort. The door surrendered suddenly, swinging inward with a groan that reverberated through the stairwell. Cool air rushed past them, carrying scents they couldn't immediately identify: old paper, earth, metal, and something else, something that reminded Sophie of museums and libraries, the distinctive scent of history preserved. Their flashlight beams penetrated the darkness beyond, revealing a sight that stole their breath. Before them stretched a chamber far larger than anticipated, carved directly into the bedrock beneath the house. The ceiling arched overhead, supported by timber beams that had withstood the weight of decades. Walls lined with rough-hewn shelves extended into shadows beyond the reach of their lights. They stepped across the threshold, flashlights sweeping slowly from left to right, cataloging what lay before them. The chamber was rectangular, perhaps 30 feet long and 20 wide, its dimensions suggesting deliberate design rather than natural formation. The shelves lining the walls held books, hundreds of them, their leather bindings faded but intact, gold lettering still visible on many spines. Between bookshelf sections stood glass-fronted cabinets containing objects they couldn't immediately identify. Tables occupied the center of the room, their surfaces covered with maps and documents held in place by weights at each corner. Sophie approached the nearest table, directing her light onto its contents. A map larger than any she had seen before spread across the surface, yellowed with age, but meticulously preserved. It showed not just Millbrook and surrounding areas, but a network of routes extending north toward Canada. Locations were marked with symbols similar to those on the map they'd found upstairs, but more extensive, more detailed. Lines connected various points, some solid, others dotted, suggesting primary and alternative routes. Handwritten notes filled the margins. Dates, initials, numbers that likely represented people who had passed through. Some entries were crossed out, others circled, creating a record of journeys successful and interrupted. Emma moved to a glass cabinet, carefully opening its door when she found it unlocked. Inside lay artifacts arranged with obvious care. A pair of handmade shoes worn through at the soles, a hand-stitched doll made from scraps of fabric, a set of forged freedom papers with different names, but the same descriptions, allowing one document to serve multiple individuals. Most disturbing was a pair of iron manacles, small enough for a child's wrists, their surface pitted with rust. Emma closed the cabinet door quickly, unwilling to touch these physical reminders of cruelty. The books on the shelves represented another treasure. First editions of abolitionist texts sat alongside journals kept by Preston family members, documenting their work in careful code. Personal accounts written by those who had passed through told stories of courage and endurance that history textbooks had sanitized or omitted entirely. As they moved deeper into the chamber, the enormity of their discovery settled over them. This was not merely a hiding place or storage room. This was an archive deliberately preserved, documenting a crucial but often overlooked chapter of American history. The Preston family had not only participated in the Underground Railroad, they had chronicled it, preserved its artifacts, created a record that survived when so many others had been lost. Sophie's flashlight beam caught something unexpected. In the far corner, a narrow opening in the wall, suggesting another passage leading away from the main chamber. She approached cautiously, directing her light into the darkness beyond. A tunnel, its walls reinforced with timber, like the main chamber, extended further than her light could reach. She hesitated at the threshold, unwilling to venture into unknown passages without preparation. The tunnel's existence suggested connections beyond the property, perhaps to other safe houses or escape routes. Another mystery to explore, but one that could wait until they had properly documented their current discovery. A particularly violent thunderclap shook the chamber, dust raining down from the ceiling beams. The storm above was reaching its peak, its fury penetrating even this sanctuary deep beneath the earth. The sound startled them both, a reminder of their vulnerability in this strange place between past and present. "We should go back up," Sophie decided. "Make sure the house is secure in this storm. We can come back tomorrow with better lights. Maybe William could help us explore further." Emma nodded reluctantly, clearly torn between the excitement of discovery and practical concerns. They retraced their steps toward the iron-bound door, passing beneath the timber beams that had silently witnessed decades of history. A sudden noise from above froze them in place, not thunder or wind, but something else. Footsteps, heavy and purposeful, moving across the floor directly above the underground chamber. Sophie extinguished her flashlight, pulling Emma close in the sudden darkness. The footsteps continued, accompanied now by the beam of a flashlight visible through the cracks between the floorboards above. Someone was in the house, someone who had entered without their knowledge or permission. Low voices filtered down to them, indistinct but clearly masculine. The footsteps moved systematically through the rooms above, as if searching for something specific. Sophie's mind raced through possibilities, thieves taking advantage of the storm, curiosity seekers who had heard about the house's new owners, or something more sinister connected to their discoveries. "The tunnel," Emma whispered, her breath warm against Sophie's ear. "We could escape that way." Sophie shook her head, not daring to speak. The tunnel was an unknown, potentially dangerous, and would take them away from Emma's safety. Better to hide and wait at least until they understood who was above and what they wanted. They retreated to the far corner of the chamber, positioning themselves behind a tall bookcase that offered concealment. The footsteps continued overhead, occasionally stopping, as if to examine something of interest. A metallic clang suggested the intruders were using tools, perhaps attempting to pry up floorboards or dismantle walls. The storm provided a strange advantage. Its fury masked any small sounds they might make, while the intermittent thunder made the intruder's movements above more difficult to track precisely. Sophie strained to hear conversations, catching only fragments, should be here somewhere, and checked behind the walls. With sickening clarity, she realized they were searching for the hidden door they had discovered earlier that day. These weren't random intruders. They knew about the house's secrets, or at least suspected their existence. The question was, how had they known to look? Minutes stretched endlessly as they huddled in the darkness. Emma remained surprisingly calm, her small body pressed against Sophie's side, her breathing steady despite the danger. The footsteps moved from room to room, growing closer to the living room where the hidden door awaited discovery. A particularly loud crash from above suggested furniture being overturned or pushed aside. Had they found the cabinet they'd moved earlier? Were they now examining the wall behind it? Noting the mismatched wallpaper patterns, the subtle outline of a concealed door, Sophie's fears were confirmed moments later when a shaft of light appeared at the top of the stone staircase. The hidden door had been opened. Flashlight beams bobbed in the darkness as someone began descending the stairs. The sound of multiple sets of footsteps echoed in the stairwell, growing louder with each passing second. Trapped and cornered, Sophie made a split-second decision. She pulled Emma deeper into the shadows behind the bookcase, positioning them so they could see the chamber's entrance, but wouldn't be immediately visible to anyone entering. It wasn't a perfect hiding place, but it might buy them time to understand what they were facing. Two men appeared in the doorway of the underground chamber, their flashlights sweeping across the space in wide arcs. They wore dark clothing and work boots, their faces partially obscured by the shadows cast by their own lights. Not the polished appearance of Blackwood's business associates, but something more practical, more dangerous. "Holy shit," one whispered, his voice carrying clearly in the chamber's perfect acoustics. "Look at all this stuff. It's exactly like he said." "Focus," the other replied. "We're not here for a history lesson. Find anything that looks valuable, especially papers and maps. He said there should be records down here that prove ownership." They moved into the chamber, examining tables and shelves, occasionally stuffing items into backpacks they carried. Their methodical approach suggested this wasn't random looting, but a targeted search, someone specifically interested in the chamber's historical contents. Sophie's mind connected the dots. Blackwood. This had to be his doing, sending men to find proof of whatever claim he believed he had on the property. The timing was too perfect. The target too specific to be coincidence. He must have been watching the house, waiting for an opportunity like tonight's storm to provide cover for his intrusion. A third voice called from the top of the stairs, urgent and alarmed. "Police, multiple cars coming up the drive. We need to go now." The two men cursed hastily, zipping their half-filled backpacks. "Grab what you've got. We'll have to come back another time." They retreated quickly, footsteps pounding up the stone staircase. Sophie remained frozen in place, unwilling to risk movement until she was certain they were gone. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the continuing rumble of thunder overhead and the distant wail of sirens growing louder. When she was finally convinced the immediate danger had passed, Sophie led Emma cautiously toward the staircase. They ascended slowly, pausing frequently to listen for any signs the intruders remained in the house. The storm's intensity had diminished somewhat, rain now falling in a steady pattern rather than violent sheets. At the top of the stairs, they found the hidden door standing wide open, the cabinet pushed completely aside. The living room beyond showed signs of thorough searching: furniture, overturned cushions, slashed open floorboards pried up in several places. The systematic destruction continued throughout the house. Every potential hiding place violated, every surface disturbed. Blue and red lights strobed through the windows, illuminating the chaos in pulsing bursts. Police cars had indeed arrived, their sirens silenced, but emergency lights still spinning. Voices called from outside, official and authoritative. "Police, is anyone inside the house?" Sophie responded immediately, relief flooding through her. She led Emma to the front door, opening it to reveal 4 officers on the porch, hands hovering near their weapons until they registered the woman and child before them. "Are you the homeowners?" The question came from the lead officer, a stocky man with a weathered face and the name Adams on his badge. Sophie explained quickly they had been exploring the basement when intruders entered during the storm. They'd hidden until the men fled at the sound of approaching police. No, she hadn't seen their faces clearly. Yes, they'd taken some items from the house. Sheriff Adams took minimal notes, his expression skeptical. Likely kids looking for valuables in an old house. Been happening more since people started moving in from the city. His dismissive attitude confirmed Eleanor's warning. Some local officials aligned with Blackwood's interests, viewing development as Millbrook's only economic hope. The explanation for the police arrival came from an unexpected source. William Barnes emerged from one of the other vehicles, concern etched into his weathered features. He'd been driving by, noticed unusual activity at the house during the storm, and called the sheriff's department. These weren't kids, he insisted, examining the systematic damage to the house. Look at the tool marks, pry bars, professional work. They knew what they were looking for. Sheriff Adams shrugged, already turning to leave. File a report if anything valuable is missing. Not much more we can do tonight. After the police departed, William remained helping Sophie secure the broken rear window where the intruders had likely entered. I don't trust Adams, he confided, voice low, despite being alone in the house. Too friendly with Blackwood and his crowd. Sophie described the underground chamber, watching William's reaction carefully. Unlike the sheriff's skepticism, William showed no surprise, only grim confirmation. The Preston station. Been wondering if it was still intact after all these years. Heard stories about it my whole life, but never knew anyone who'd actually seen it. His knowledge made sense, connecting to Eleanor's comments about community protection of the house through generations. You knew it was there, didn't you? That's why you've been helping us. William's hands stilled on the window frame he was repairing. Not exactly. Knew there was something. My grandfather used to tell stories, said the Preston house had secrets worth protecting. When you moved in, started asking questions, I figured maybe it was time for those secrets to be found. The storm had fully passed by midnight, leaving behind a sky washed clean of clouds, stars emerging in brilliant clarity. William departed with a promise to return in the morning, bringing supplies to better secure the house. Sophie and Emma worked for another hour, restoring basic order to the chaos the intruders had left behind. Too wired for sleep, despite the late hour, they sat at the kitchen table processing the night's events. The intrusion had transformed their historical discovery from academic interest to something more urgent, more personally consequential. Someone Blackwood almost certainly wanted the underground chamber's contents badly enough to resort to criminal methods. The question was why. It's about the papers, Emma reasoned, wisdom beyond her years, evident in her steady gaze. They said they were looking for records that prove ownership. Maybe there's something down there that shows who really owns this land. Sophie considered the possibility. Property disputes often hinged on ancient deeds, boundary markers, or inheritance claims long forgotten. If Blackwood believed documents in the underground chamber could strengthen his claim to the property, it would explain his persistent interest in increasingly aggressive tactics. Morning brought sunshine that belied the previous night's violence. The yard showed storm-damaged branches, down garden debris scattered across the drive, but the house had weathered the assault remarkably well for its age. Sophie took this as another sign of the structure's resilience, its determination to protect its secrets until the right time. Eleanor arrived unexpectedly, her ancient sedan pulling into the drive, just as Sophie was assessing external damage. News had already reached her through Millbrook's invisible but efficient communication network. The break in the police response, William's intervention. It was Blackwood's men, she stated without preamble. 2 construction workers he uses for special projects. Been identified by 3 different people who saw their truck parked on the fire road behind your property during the storm. Sophie wasn't surprised by the confirmation, but the community's rapid identification of the culprits caught her off guard. It suggested networks of observation and information sharing she hadn't anticipated in the small-town people watching and reporting, despite Sheriff Adams's apparent indifference. Eleanor brought her nephew, a contractor with carpentry skills far beyond Sophie's own. He immediately began repairing the broken window, while Eleanor beckoned Sophie to her car. From the trunk, she produced a cardboard box filled with home-canned preserves, fresh bread, and a casserole dish still warm from the oven. Called some friends last night, she explained as they carried the provisions inside. You'll have visitors today. Lots of them. Best to be prepared. The cryptic statement made sense by afternoon. A steady stream of Millbrook residents began arriving at the Preston house, elderly couples bringing food. Middle-aged men offering to check the roof for storm damage, young adults volunteering to clear fallen branches from the yard. Each visitor introduced themselves as having family connections to Millbrook's oldest lineages, many specifically mentioning relatives who had known the Prestons. This demonstration of community support continued into evening. Cars and trucks lined the driveway and spilled onto the main road, creating visible evidence that the Preston house was neither abandoned nor unprotected. Sheriff Adams drove past, twice observing but not interfering, perhaps recognizing that his jurisdiction had limitations in the face of community action. By sunset, most visitors had departed, but three vehicles remained: Eleanor's sedan, a pickup truck belonging to her nephew, and an RV owned by an elderly woman who had shared stories of her grandmother's connection to the Underground Railroad. They would stay the night, they explained, a rotating watch arranged for the coming weeks until more permanent security could be established. Their presence allowed Sophie her first full night's sleep since discovering the underground chamber. She woke refreshed mind, clear enough to formulate next steps. The break-in had accelerated their timeline. Whatever historical significance the chamber held, it needed documentation and protection before Blackwood made another attempt to claim its contents. Eleanor suggested contacting an expert, someone who could authenticate their findings and provide guidance on preservation. There's a historian at the State University specializes in Underground Railroad history. Trustworthy from what I hear. James Morgan. The call to Dr. Morgan yielded immediate interest. He could visit the following day, though Sophie was careful to provide only general information over the phone, an old house with possible Underground Railroad connections, artifacts that needed assessment. Better to share the full extent of their discovery in person, where reactions could be gauged and trust established. With security concerns temporarily addressed by the community watch, Sophie and Emma returned to the underground chamber, this time equipped with better lights and recording equipment. Sophie's phone camera documented each section methodically: the bookshelves with their historical volumes, the glass cabinets with their preserved artifacts, the tables with their maps and documents. In daylight filtered through the house above, but still providing better illumination than their flashlights, new details emerged. Small markings on the stone walls that might be signatures or messages, where patterns on the floor suggesting frequent movement along certain paths. A ventilation system ingeniously designed to provide fresh air without revealing the chamber's existence from above. Emma gravitated toward the tunnel entrance, her natural curiosity drawing her to this unexplored mystery. "Can we see where it goes? Just a little way in." Sophie hesitated, recalling her own uncertainty the previous night. The tunnel represented an unknown, potentially dangerous. Yet it was also part of the historical record they were trying to preserve, another piece of the Preston legacy that deserved documentation. "Just a short distance," she agreed. We stayed together, and we turned back at the first sign of any structural concerns. The tunnel proved remarkably well constructed, its walls reinforced with timber supports similar to those in the main chamber. The ceiling arched overhead high enough that Sophie could walk upright without stooping. The floor sloped gently downward, leading them deeper beneath the property. Their progress was slow, each section carefully examined before proceeding. The air quality remained surprisingly good, suggesting the same ventilation system that served the main chamber extended through the tunnel as well. Occasional markings on the wall, arrows, stars, simple geometric shapes appeared at regular intervals, their purpose unclear but clearly deliberate. After proceeding approximately 100 feet, they reached a junction where the main tunnel continued straight, while a narrower passage branched off to the right. Emma's flashlight beam revealed something carved into the wall. At this intersection, a series of interconnected circles and lines that formed no pattern Sophie recognized. "Stars," Emma whispered, eyes wide with realization. "It's a star map. Look, that's the Big Dipper, and there's the North Star." Sophie studied the carving more carefully, seeing the constellation patterns now that Emma had identified them. The significance struck her immediately. Travelers using the Underground Railroad often navigated by stars, the North Star in particular, serving as a constant guide toward freedom. These carvings might have been instructional, teaching those passing through how to orient themselves once they emerged from the tunnel's protection. They continued cautiously, the tunnel now curving gently to the left. The timber supports appeared newer in this section, suggesting repairs or reinforcement, more recent than the original construction. Another 100 feet brought them to a set of wooden steps leading upward to what appeared to be a trapdoor in the ceiling. Wisdom overcame curiosity at this point. Without knowing where the trapdoor led or its structural condition, attempting to open it seemed unnecessarily risky. They marked the location in their improvised map and turned back, retracing their steps to the main chamber. The entire exploration had taken less than an hour, but it felt like a journey across time itself. The tunnel's existence confirmed what Sophie had begun to suspect. The Preston house hadn't been merely a station where fugitives rested, but an engineered escape route allowing travelers to bypass roads where patrols might intercept them. Upon returning to the main chamber, they found William waiting for them, concern evident in his stance. Thought you might have gone exploring. Tunnel's impressive, isn't it? Leads all the way to the river about a quarter-mile north. Comes out in a stand of trees near what used to be a ford crossing. His knowledge of the tunnel's destination raised immediate questions. You've been through it before. William shook his head. Not personally. My grandfather mapped it years ago when he was helping maintain the property after the last Preston died. Town council wanted to make sure all the escape routes were accounted for in case the property ever changed hands. This new piece of information added another layer to Sophie's understanding of Millbrook's relationship with the Preston house. The town hadn't just been aware of its historical significance, they had actively preserved it, maintaining knowledge of its secrets through generations, waiting for the right owner, the right moment in history. William continued sharing what he knew of the tunnel system. There are 5 access points, including this main chamber. The Preston house was the hub, but tunnels connected to 4 other properties, all owned by families with Underground Railroad connections. This wasn't just a town with a few abolitionists. It was a fully integrated station in the journey north, with multiple safe houses and escape routes working in concert. The scale of the operation, the coordination required, the risks taken by so many families, it transformed Sophie's understanding of both the house and the town itself. Millbrook wasn't just a failing paper mill town. It was a community built on a foundation of moral courage, whose residents had risked everything for fundamental human dignity. Their conversation was interrupted by Emma's call from across the chamber. She had been examining the wall near the tunnel entrance and discovered something they had overlooked: a section of stone floor with carvings different from the surrounding area. Geometric patterns carved with precision, visible only when viewed from certain angles. More star maps, Sophie suggested, kneeling to examine the markings. Emma shook her head. I don't think so. These are different, more mathematical, more precise. William joined them, his expression changing as he recognized the patterns. Navigation markers, he explained. My grandfather called them celestial guideposts, sophisticated wayfinding system using stars rather than landmarks. He traced the geometric shapes with practiced fingers. System originated in ancient seafaring cultures, but was adapted by Underground Railroad conductors to guide travelers through unfamiliar territories. Stars remained constant reference points when landscapes changed or became unfamiliar. Constellations appeared the same whether viewed from Virginia or Massachusetts, providing directional guidance independent of geographic knowledge. This explained the star carvings they had seen in the tunnel, not decorative elements but crucial navigation tools for those seeking freedom in unknown territory. Sophie marveled at the ingenuity, the layers of planning and foresight built into every aspect of the Preston station. As William's finger traced one particular pattern, something unexpected happened. A slight depression in the stone gave way beneath his touch, accompanied by a faint mechanical click from somewhere beneath the floor. All 3 froze, exchanging wide-eyed glances. The chamber that had seemed so fully revealed still contained secrets waiting to be discovered. What mechanism had they just activated? What new wonder or danger awaited revelation? Their answer came in the form of movement, a rectangular section of stone floor shifting slightly, rising perhaps half an inch from its previously flush position. A hidden compartment concealed within a room that was itself hidden from the world above. Sophie's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the edge of the stone rectangle. The weight surprised her, solid granite at least 2 inches thick. William helped her slide it aside, revealing a space beneath approximately 2 feet square and 1 foot deep. Inside lay a small leather pouch, its surface cracked with age but intact. The anticipation was almost unbearable as Sophie lifted it carefully, feeling objects shifting within. What final secret had the Preston family concealed here in this doubly protected hiding place? Opening the drawstring top revealed a gold locket, tarnished but unblemished by time, its surface engraved with the same paternoster as the Preston family crest. The locket opened to reveal not photographs, but a tightly folded piece of paper. Sophie extracted it with trembling fingers, unfolding what proved to be a hand-drawn map, unlike those documented previously. This showed not escape routes, but locations marked with unfamiliar symbols, connected by lines that formed no obvious pattern to her untrained eye. As she studied the map, a cool draft rose from the still open compartment in the floor, wrapping around her ankles in what felt almost like acknowledgement. The house was still communicating, still revealing itself in measured stages, entrusting its deepest secrets only when the time was right. The crisp autumn morning of the press conference dawned with a clarity that belied the complexity of what lay ahead. Sophie stood at her bedroom window, watching sunlight filter through newly cleaned glass panes that had been clouded with decades of neglect just months before. The Preston house, once an act of desperation, had transformed into the epicenter of a historical revelation that would reach far beyond Millbrook's boundaries. She dressed with deliberate care, dark slacks and a jewel-toned blouse that conveyed professionalism without formality. The outfit was new, purchased with money from the modest stipend the Preston Trust's preliminary activation had provided. Dr. Morgan had discovered the Trust's existence in county archives the previous week, its provisions specifically designed for when the chambers reveal themselves to one worthy of their keeping. The gold locket rested in Sophie's pocket, its weight now familiar. The carefully folded map inside remained her private connection to the house, a secret she had shared with neither De Morgan nor Eleanor. Something in her instinctively knew that some revelations required perfect timing, and this one wasn't ready to be shared. Eleanor arrived promptly at 9, her silver Buick crunching on the newly laid gravel of the repaired driveway. At 72, she moved with deliberate precision that masked the energy beneath. Today, she wore what Sophie had come to recognize as her official outfit, a navy dress with a brooch that had belonged to her grandmother, a woman whose photograph Sophie had seen among those shared by community elders. "You look like you're heading to court, not a press conference," Eleanor noted, passing Sophie a thermos of coffee strong enough to fuel their 90-minute drive to the university. Their conversation during the journey focused on practicalities, the security arrangements for the house during their absence, the rotation of community members who had organized themselves into an informal watch contingency plans for increased attention following the announcement. Beneath these logistics ran an undercurrent of tension that neither acknowledged directly. Once this information entered the public domain, the protection of obscurity would be permanently lost. Emma had elected to remain behind with William cataloging artifacts in the underground chamber. The girl had blossomed in the weeks since their discovery, her natural intelligence finding purpose in historical research. She had developed an encyclopedic knowledge of underground railroad history and demonstrated remarkable skill in handling fragile documents. Dr. Morgan had begun referring to her as his apprentice historian, a title Emma wore with unmistakable pride. The State University campus bustled with ordinary activity students hurrying between classes, professors clutching coffee cups, groundskeepers tending to early fallen leaves. This academic normality created jarring contrast with Sophie's awareness of what they were about to reveal. History didn't announce itself with dramatic fanfare. It lived quietly in hidden chambers until someone chose to acknowledge its presence. Dr. Morgan met them at his office door, his expression balancing professional excitement with measured concern. His position at the university provided institutional legitimacy for the announcement, but also created professional risk if the revelation proved less significant than assessed. He had carefully curated the guest list for the press conference, select local reporters, academic colleagues with expertise in relevant historical periods, representatives from preservation organizations with proven ethical approaches. The small auditorium designated for the announcement held perhaps 30 people. No television cameras by deliberate choice. The strategy was to control the initial narrative through academic and historical channels, establishing scholarly context before broader media attention inevitably followed. Sophie paused at the threshold, sudden doubt washing through her. The weight of responsibility for what lay beneath the Preston house had grown steadily since discovering the hidden door. Now she stood at another threshold, one that would transform private discovery into public knowledge with consequences impossible to fully anticipate. Dr. Morgan sensed her hesitation, pausing beside her. "This decision remains yours. We can postpone if you are not certain." A minute passed in contemplative silence. Then Sophie squared her shoulders and nodded once decisively. The Preston house had survived decades of secrets. Its story deserved proper telling, its significance acknowledged beyond Millbrook's boundaries. With this resolution firmly in mind, she entered the auditorium. Dr. Morgan opened the presentation with historical context, the Underground Railroad's operation in the Northeast, the network of safe houses and escape routes, the courage of both those fleeing bondage and those assisting them despite legal and social consequences. He established the rarity of preserved sites, most having been demolished, repurposed, or significantly altered over intervening decades. When Sophie stepped to the podium, the prepared statement in her hands suddenly felt inadequate, clinical bullet points that failed to capture the human reality of what she had discovered. She set the notes aside, choosing instead to speak directly from experience. Her description of finding the hidden door descending stone stairs, worn smooth by countless footsteps before hers, entering the underground chamber for the first time delivered without rehearsed polish, captured the audience's attention more effectively than polished rhetoric could have achieved. She emphasized historical significance over personal ownership, community protection over individual discovery. The Preston House emerged in her telling, not as her property but as cultural heritage, a physical connection to courage that transcended time and circumstance. Photographs appeared on the screen behind her carefully selected images, showing the chamber's scope without revealing security-sensitive details, maps with specific locations, obscured artifacts, photographed against neutral backgrounds that provided no positioning context, enough to verify the discovery's importance while protecting its vulnerability. Questions followed the presentation, thoughtful inquiries from academic colleagues, more sensationalized queries from local reporters. Sophie navigated them with growing confidence, deferring technical questions to Dr. Morgan while addressing broader implications herself. The Preston Trust's existence generated particular interest, its legal framework establishing protection that predated modern preservation laws by nearly a century. The event proceeded as planned until an unexpected interruption. The auditorium door opened midway through the question period, admitting Robert Blackwood flanked by two men in expensive suits carrying leather briefcases, attorneys based on their demeanor, and immediate presentation of business cards to those seated nearby. Their entrance caused immediate tension, conversations faltering, as attention shifted to the late arrivals. Blackwood moved to the center aisle, his confidence palpable, as he projected his voice without need for microphone. His challenge came wrapped in civility, but landed like an accusation, questioning the discovery's authenticity, suggesting creative embellishment for academic attention, implying misrepresentation of historical significance. His attorneys distributed documents to nearby reporters, copies of the lawsuit filing carefully edited to emphasize Blackwood family claims, while minimizing their historical connection to slave ownership. A calculated attempt to reframe the narrative before it fully formed in public consciousness. Dr. Morgan moved to intercept academic authority facing financial power in the auditorium center. Their exchange remained superficially polite, while fundamentally adversarial, competing interpretations of history and ownership rights delivered for public consumption. Sophie watched from the podium, recognizing the confrontation's performative aspect. Blackwood had come not expecting to convince this audience, but to create doubt in the public record, to establish competing claims that would complicate preservation efforts. Eleanor approached discreetly, pressing a folded document into Sophie's palm. The yellowed paper had not been mentioned, previously retrieved from Wilson family records after the press conference was scheduled. Its existence had been kept in reserve insurance against exactly this situation. Sophie unfolded the paper, carefully scanning contents that connected historical dots with damning precision. Her decision formed in seconds measured response against calculated escalation. With deliberate steps, she joined the confrontation at the auditorium center. The document details Samuel Blackwood's activities in 1858, not just his failed raid on the Preston House, but specific records of bounties offered for captured fugitives, descriptions of punishments inflicted on those returned to his ownership correspondence with other slave owners, establishing a network dedicated to undermining abolitionist efforts. Most significantly, it contains Samuel Blackwood's signed orders offering payment for information leading to the Preston family's arrest under the Fugitive Slave Act, direct evidence linking Blackwood's ancestor to active persecution of those aiding escaped slaves. Sophie placed the document in Robert Blackwood's hands, her voice steady and clear enough to carry throughout the now silent auditorium. You speak of family claims and property rights. Your ancestors' own words establish what truly motivates your interest. The paper trembled visibly in Blackwood's grasp as he scanned its contents, color draining from his face. His attorneys moved closer, reading over his shoulder, exchanging glances that acknowledged tactical disadvantage. This evidence directly contradicted their carefully constructed narrative of innocent family interest in legitimate property rights. Blackwood recovered quickly, professional mask sliding back into place as he folded the document and passed it to his attorneys. A momentary falter, nothing more but the damage had been done. Reporters had witnessed his reaction, would question its cause, would investigate connections his legal team had worked to obscure. His departure carried a forced dignity, attorneys close behind, no further statements offered to the curious audience. The confrontation had lasted perhaps 5 minutes total, yet fundamentally altered the press conference's dynamics. What had begun as controlled academic announcement had transformed into public contest between preservation and development, between historical truth and convenient narrative. Dr. Morgan resumed the presentation with admirable composure, addressing newly energized questions about the Blackwood family's historical role and contemporary interest. Sophie returned to the podium for closing statements, emphasizing again the site's significance beyond personal or local boundaries. By session's end, the Preston House had been firmly established in academic record as a nationally significant Underground Railroad site, its preservation importance documented by experts, its protection supported by both historical evidence and legal framework. Whatever Blackwood planned next would face this established narrative as counterweight. The drive back to Millbrook brought reflection rather than celebration. Public announcement had committed Sophie to a path with unpredictable consequences. Media attention would increase. Preservation organizations would seek involvement. Academics would request access. The private sanctuary would become public heritage, its protection both strengthened and complicated by increased visibility. Community response manifested immediately upon their return. Cars lined the road approaching the Preston House, not curiosity seekers, but Millbrook residents forming visible demonstration of local support. Eleanor explained their presence with characteristic understatement. Word travels fast, they've come to stand with history. And the gathering had organized itself during Sophie's absence, folding chairs appearing on the lawn, a table laden with potluck offerings, elderly residents sharing stories with younger generations. Not protest, but affirmation, community claiming by connection to legacy Sophie had uncovered. Sheriff Adams drove past, twice observing, without intervention, perhaps recognizing the political cost of challenging this peaceful assembly. Blackwood's construction vehicles remained conspicuously absent from nearby roads, their normal paths diverted to avoid direct confrontation with community sentiment. Evening brought transformation rather than dispersal. Lanterns appeared as darkness fell, creating pools of light across the property. Some residents departed, replaced by others, arriving after work hours. The gathering evolved into vigil protection through presence visible statement that the Preston House stood not isolated, but embedded within community that claimed its heritage. The weeks following the press conference brought escalating legal maneuvers. Blackwood's lawsuit claimed ownership interests based on obscure historical agreements, while Sophie's attorneys countered with the Preston Trust's provisions. Both sides filed motions and countermotions, creating paper battles that would require months to resolve through conventional legal channels. 3 months into this legal stalemate, Dr. Catherine Zhang's arrival marked transition to formal preservation planning. The National Museum curator brought institutional resources and professional expertise to discussions previously navigated through improvisation and a local knowledge. Her perspective expanded options beyond simple binary of private ownership versus public access. During a particularly intense documentation session in the underground chamber, Sophie noticed Dr. Zhang studying the floor markings she had discovered months earlier near the tunnel entrance. Unlike previous experts, the curator's expression showed immediate recognition. These aren't decorative elements, Dr. Zhang explained, kneeling to trace the geometric patterns with practiced fingers. They're celestial navigation markers, a sophisticated wayfinding system using stars rather than landmarks. The system, she explained, originated in ancient seafaring cultures, but had been adapted by Underground Railroad conductors to guide travelers through unfamiliar territories. Stars remained constant reference points when landscapes changed or became unfamiliar. Constellations appeared the same, whether viewed from Virginia or Massachusetts, providing directional guidance independent of geographic knowledge. This explanation provided key to understanding the Lockett's map. Sophie retrieved it from her quarters, showing Dr. Zhang without explaining its discovery circumstances. The curator confirmed Sophie's suspicion. The map documented not physical routes but astronomical guides, timing systems based on seasonal star positions that indicated optimal travel periods, methods for determining direction without compass recognition, signals using celestial references. This elevates our understanding of how the Underground Railroad functioned, Dr. Zhang noted with professional excitement. Not just courageous improvisation, but systematic resistance, utilizing sophisticated knowledge deliberately hidden from pursuers. 6 months after the press conference, Blackwood launched new offensive through economic pressure. Construction projects throughout Millbrook suddenly suspended operations, workers laid off without notice, supply orders canceled with local businesses. The message required no explicit statement. The town's economic future depended on Blackwood developments, on compliance with his objectives, on choosing prosperity over preservation. Town council meetings became battlegrounds divided between economic pragmatism and historical responsibility. Blackwood's supporters emphasized jobs, tax revenue, community revitalization through development. Preservation advocates countered with cultural heritage, historical significance, moral obligation to protect truth, however inconvenient. The conflict transcended simple financial calculus, revealing fundamental questions about community identity. What defined Millbrook's character, its future development, or historical foundations? What obligations did present generations hold toward both past and future, whose voices deserve priority in determining communal direction? Sophie attended these debates as reluctant central figure, her accidental discovery having catalyzed confrontation brewing for generations. She spoke when necessary, but increasingly recognized her role as witness rather than principal, the Preston House's significance extending beyond her personal connection to it. 9 months into this community division, an unexpected event shifted the dynamic. Sheriff Adams received an anonymous tip about illegal business practices at Blackwood Development's headquarters. The subsequent investigation uncovered tax irregularities and permit violations substantial enough to warrant county-level investigation. The sheriff's office executed a search warrant with uncharacteristic thoroughness, seizing financial records and electronic devices. Adams personally supervised the operation, his previous alignment with Blackwood's interests apparently transformed by evidence he couldn't ignore. His position as elected official ultimately proved stronger than developer influence when faced with documented illegalities. This legal scrutiny weakened Blackwood's leverage throughout the region. Construction projects remained suspended, but blame shifted from preservation efforts to the developer's legal troubles. Community sentiment gradually consolidated behind the Preston House preservation as Blackwood's promises of economic revival grew increasingly hollow. Resolution emerged not through dramatic confrontation, but accumulated small decisions. Local businesses refused Blackwood's renewed contracts despite financial pressure. County Historical Commission granted emergency protection status despite development lobbying. State Preservation Office initiated review for National Register listing despite procedural challenges from Blackwood's attorneys. Each individual choice created momentum toward Preservation Collective will express through seemingly minor actions that together established unmistakable direction. Blackwood's leverage diminished with each decision, prioritizing historical significance over economic expediency. 14 months after the press conference, Sophie returned from grocery shopping to find Blackwood's luxury SUV parked in her driveway, its solitary presence more concerning than previous visits accompanied by attorneys or construction workers. He waited on the porch posture, suggesting casual confidence. His expression contradicted. Their conversation began with rehearsed reasonableness, mutual interest, compromise possibilities, recognition of both development needs and historical significance. But beneath polished phrases lay final offer, not for property purchase, but for controlled narrative. Blackwood would withdraw legal challenges, support historical designation with specific boundaries limited to the house itself, even contribute to preservation, fund establishing his family as benefactors rather than opponents. In exchange, certain historical records would remain sealed, specifically those documenting Samuel Blackwood's activities, his pursuit of escaped slaves, his targeting of the Preston family. History would acknowledge the Underground Railroad connections without emphasizing those who opposed it. He proposed with carefully neutral expression. Preservation would proceed without publicly identifying historical villains alongside heroes. The proposal represented calculated acceptance of inevitable preservation attempt to control historical narrative rather than prevent its revelation. Blackwood's priority had shifted from acquisition to reputation management, from preventing discovery to shaping its interpretation. Sophie considered the offer with genuine deliberation, recognizing legitimate complexity in judging historical figures by contemporary standards. Preservation didn't require vilification. Education could acknowledge context without excusing actions. Perhaps compromise served higher purpose than absolute exposure. As she weighed these considerations, Sophie's fingers closed around the gold locket in her pocket, feeling embossed pattern against her palm. The house had protected its secrets for generations, revealing them selectively to those deemed worthy of trust. That trust now extended to her, carrying a responsibility beyond personal preference or practical expedience. Her refusal came without hostility, but with unmistakable finality. The Underground Railroad existed because people made moral choices despite legal prohibition and social consequence. Preserving physical evidence while obscuring moral context dishonors both those seeking freedom and those providing assistance. Both constitute historical reality worth preserving. Blackwood's departure carried defeat in every movement, shoulders slightly bowed beneath expensive suit steps lacking customary confidence. His vehicle disappeared down the gravel drive without backward glance, leaving only dissipating dust cloud as evidence of final capitulation. Legal resolution followed within weeks. Lawsuit withdrawn, development plans redirected toward commercial property outside historical district, public statement acknowledging Preston House's significance and supporting preservation efforts without mentioning Blackwood family's historical connection. 18 months after the press conference, the Preston House Historical Center prepared for limited opening, not public museum with daily visitors, but educational resource available through scheduled appointments, primarily serving researchers, school groups, and descendants of those connected to Underground Railroad history. During final preparation for the opening, Sophie noticed Eleanor's increasing fatigue. The elderly woman's visits had become shorter. Her energy visibly diminished, though her commitment remained unwavering. Medical tests confirmed what many had suspected: advanced cancer requiring immediate treatment. One evening, as they reviewed educational materials in the kitchen, Eleanor suddenly stopped mid-sentence, her gaze distant. "There's something I need to show you," she announced with unusual solemnity. "Something I should have shared months ago." From her handbag, she withdrew a small brass key, unlike any Sophie had seen in the house. The basement of the Wilson farmhouse contained its own secrets, Eleanor explained, not as extensive as yours, but connected nonetheless. The key opened a safe deposit box at Millbrook's small bank containing documents Eleanor's family had preserved for generations. Letters between Thomas Preston and Eleanor's great-grandfather detailed not just Underground Railroad activities, but plans for preserving their records should the worst occur. Most significantly, the documents referenced a complete accounting, hidden within the Preston house separate from the material in the main chamber. The final record will remain concealed until a time when truth may be freely told without danger to me or those named therein. One letter stated, "Not merely for protection, but for future understanding of both courage and cruelty that shape these days." This revelation sent Sophie back to the underground chamber with renewed purpose. For 2 days, she examined every inch of the space, focusing particularly on the floor markings near the tunnel entrance. Their celestial navigation purpose had been established, but perhaps they served dual function. Acting on intuition developed through months of connection to the house, Sophie positioned the gold locket against specific marking in the carved pattern. The metal nestled perfectly into depression that had seemed random during previous examinations, the locket's embossed design aligning with carved floor pattern to create complete image previously fragmented. A mechanism activated somewhere beneath the stone, not modern electronics, but 19th century engineering maintained through careful design. A section of wall previously appearing solid shifted slightly, revealing narrow opening behind what had seemed solid stone. Not hidden door, but concealed compartment, final layer of protection beyond already secret chamber. Inside lay a leather-bound book, significantly larger than documents previously discovered, its cover unmarked but clearly crafted with extraordinary care. The handwritten title page, dated 1875, bore the inscription, "Complete records of the Preston Station and connected operations, 1847 to 1865." With dedication below, "Preserved for future generations when truth may be freely told and courage properly honored." Sophie immediately contacted Eleanor, helping her down the stone staircase despite weakened condition. Together, they examined the book's contents, comprehensive documentation of Underground Railroad operations centered at Preston House, but extending throughout region. Names, dates, origins, destinations recorded with meticulous precision. Maps showing complete network rather than isolated segments. Accounts written by travelers themselves describing experiences in their own words. Most significantly, the records included information deliberately omitted from materials stored in the main chamber, specific identities of both conductors and pursuers, detailed accounts of confrontations, successes and failures documented with equal thoroughness. "This isn't selective history, but complete record," Eleanor noted, turning pages with reverent care. They understood that future circumstances might permit full disclosure, impossible during operation or immediate aftermath. The discovery raised profound ethical questions. These records named individuals, both those deserving historical honor and those whose actions merited less favorable remembrance. Descendants of both groups still lived in Millbrook and surrounding communities, their family histories potentially transformed by this documentation. "What would you do with this?" Sophie asked, recognizing Eleanor's deeper connection to community history. Eleanor considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Truth serves no purpose if it only wounds, but neither should it remain buried forever. The question isn't whether to reveal, but how, with context, with compassion, with understanding of complex humanity behind both heroism and failure." Together, they developed approach for this sensitive material: scholarly access with appropriate privacy protections, community involvement in disclosure decisions, educational context, emphasizing historical complexity rather than simplistic judgment. The book would become part of the Preston House archives, but with carefully considered protocols reflecting both historical importance and human impact. 22 months after the press conference, the Preston House Historical Center prepared for official opening. The Preservation Board had established balanced governance structure, combining professional expertise with community representation. The underground chamber remained heart of the site, its contents preserved in original positions rather than displayed in conventional museum format. Security systems incorporated discreetly into historical structure provided protection without disrupting authentic experience. Eleanor's health had declined rapidly despite aggressive treatment. Knowing she would not live to see full implementation of preservation plans, she focused on documenting her knowledge family stories connected to Underground Railroad activities, community relationships relevant to historical context, and interpretive insights from lifetime of unofficial historical stewardship. The opening ceremony was scheduled specifically to accommodate her declining strength. No media coverage by deliberate choice attendance, limited to preservation professionals, community representatives, and descendants of those connected to Underground Railroad history. The spring morning brought unexpected vitality to Eleanor, who insisted on walking unassisted to the ribbon stretched across the house's front entrance. Dr. Morgan provided historical context for assembled guests. Dr. Zhang outlined preservation approach. Community representatives expressed ongoing commitment to site protection. When Eleanor cut the ceremonial ribbon, her hands steady despite physical weakness, the gesture represented not just opening of historical site, but continuation of stewardship spanning generations. Her brief remarks emphasized not personal contribution, but community persistence, protection of historical truth maintained through decades of collective commitment. Sophie's role in ceremony remained deliberately understated, present, and acknowledged, but not centralized, her contribution recognized without claiming ownership of significance that transcended individual discovery. This positioning reflected her evolved understanding of relationship to the house and in its history, caretaker, rather than possessor, participant in ongoing story rather than its conclusion. Emma had blossomed into her role as junior docent, confidently leading small groups through carefully planned tour route, her natural enthusiasm tempered by growing historical expertise. The girl who had arrived at the property filled with uncertainty now moved through its spaces with purpose and pride, evidence of her own transformation, paralleling the house's revealed identity. Eleanor's peaceful passing 3 weeks later surprised no one but affected everyone involved with the preservation project. Her funeral brought together preservation professionals, community members, and descendants of those connected to Underground Railroad history, the very coalition she had helped build throughout her life, and particularly during final years. The memorial service included announcement of educational fellowship established in her name, supporting research into regional Underground Railroad history, with particular emphasis on community protection of historical sites. This legacy ensured her knowledge would extend beyond personal memory into institutional continuity, her commitment to preservation continuing through others' work. Sophie inherited Eleanor's collection of historical documents and family records, not valuable artifacts but contextual materials, providing deeper understanding of Millbrook's connections to broader historical movements. Among these materials, Sophie discovered Eleanor's personal journal documenting their shared journey since discovery of the underground chamber. The elderly woman had recorded not just events but reflections on history's obligations to both accuracy and respect, on community responsibility for shared heritage, on balancing protection against education. The journal concluded with paragraph written days before her death. Some houses choose their keepers. The Preston house waited generations for the right guardian to reveal its secrets. In Sophie Williams, it found someone who understood that history isn't possession, but responsibility, the obligation to preserve truth while honoring those who lived it. The house recognized what we might learn from this. Our past doesn't belong to us alone, but to those who come after, seeking understanding of how courage and conscience can stand against injustice even when law supports its perpetuation. 2 years after the press conference, the Preston House Historical Center welcomed its first scheduled visitors, a group of graduate students researching Underground Railroad routes through New England. Their experience transcended conventional museum interaction, standing where fugitives had hidden, seeing artifacts they had touched, reading words they had written. These direct connections bridged centuries more effectively than textbook descriptions or museum displays, making history immediate, personal, relevant to contemporary understanding. Educational programming emphasized not just historical facts, but moral questions underlying Underground Railroad's existence, courage required to oppose legal but immoral systems, individual responsibility when confronting institutional injustice, complexity of moral choice in challenging circumstances. These discussions resonated with visitors beyond academic interest, prompting reflection on modern parallels and continuing relevance. Sheriff Adams's official visit came unannounced, his patrol car parked discreetly rather than prominently displayed. His request for tour surprised Sophie, given his previous alignment with Blackwood's interests. She accompanied him personally through house and underground chamber, watching his expression shift from professional detachment to reluctant engagement. "My great-grandfather was a station master in Kentucky," he revealed unexpectedly as they examined the celestial navigation markers. "Family history I never paid much attention to until recently. His journals had been sitting in my attic for 30 years. His offer to contribute the journal to the Preston House archives carried significance beyond historical value, official recognition of site's legitimacy, tacit admission of misjudgment in previous dismissal. Not apology, but realignment and acknowledgement of responsibilities extending beyond immediate political considerations." The summer brought gradual community healing. Blackwood Development's restructuring following legal troubles created opportunity for smaller, locally owned businesses. Commercial district revitalization proceeded alongside historical preservation, creating balanced approach to economic development. Tourism increased modestly through historical interest, providing sustainable growth rather than transformative disruption. Exactly 2 years after Sophie's initial discovery of the hidden door, she stood on the porch watching sunset paint familiar landscape with golden light. The house around her hummed with purpose, sections preserved in historical accuracy, others carefully modified for contemporary function, the dual identity of home and heritage maintained through deliberate balance. She felt a distinct sense of accomplishment, surveying transformation that extended beyond physical structure. The desperate woman who had purchased $500 house as last resort had evolved into purposeful site director financial precarity, replaced by modest security isolation, transformed into community connection. The accidental discovery had become deliberate vocation, random purchase revealed as purposeful intersection of person and place. The evening brought special visitors, descendants of those who had passed through the Preston station generations earlier, traveling from across country for first family reunion held at site. Their presence in rooms where ancestors had temporarily sheltered created powerful connection across time, fulfilling Thomas Preston's vision of future when truth may be freely told and courage properly honored. As twilight deepened, Sophie escorted the last visitors to their cars, then returned to the porch. Stars appeared in darkening sky, the same celestial navigation points documented in the Locket map, the same constant reference that had guided travelers northward toward freedom. Emma joined her, pointing skyward with characteristic enthusiasm. Look, Mom, the North Star. Can you imagine following it for hundreds of miles, knowing it was your only reliable guide? Sophie wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders, feeling the solidity of her presence. Some guides aren't in the sky. Sometimes they're the people brave enough to light the way when everything else is darkness. She stood where Preston family members had watched for approaching travelers, where generations of Millbrook residents had maintained protective vigilance, where she now continued stewardship begun long before her birth. The $500 house had revealed itself as priceless repository of American history, its hidden chambers containing not just artifacts, but moral legacy. Sophie's accidental purchase had connected her to generations of deliberate choices, people who had recognized injustice and acted despite personal risk, who had preserved truth despite pressure to forget, who had valued human dignity above legal ownership. The house settled around her with familiar sounds, timber adjusting to evening temperature, history, breathing through ancient walls, legacy alive in preserved spaces. Not haunting, but presence, not past, but continuity, not ending, but ongoing chapter in story that had chosen her as surely as she had chosen it. Sophie unlocked the front door and stepped inside, moving through rooms now balanced between historical authenticity and contemporary function. The hidden door in the living room stood slightly ajar, no longer secret, but testimony to those who had created sanctuary in dangerous times. She closed it gently, honoring both concealment that had saved lives and revelation that now educated future generations. Outside her window, community members arrived for evening tour shift, their headlights sweeping across the newly restored facade. The Preston house stood not as isolated historical curiosity, but as living center of community that had reclaimed its complicated heritage. What had begun as Sophie's desperate purchase had transformed into collective commitment, personal crisis into shared purpose. Tomorrow would bring new visitors, new research questions, new connections between past understanding and present responsibility. Tonight, Sophie acknowledged both privilege and obligation of her position in this continuing story, not owner, but caretaker, not discoverer, but inheritor, not individual actor, but participant in generations-long commitment to preserving truth for those who would follow.